Hey friends, this is Natalie Irvan, and welcome to the ICU podcast, where we explore how we can find significance in the unseen work of leaders and learn to truly be intentional to see others in our everyday lives. I can't wait to share with you, so let's get started. Today's scripture is John 9:3. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Hey friends, and welcome back to another episode of the ICU podcast. Today is kind of a unique day because we are going to be talking as a couple. Usually my husband, Jon, is behind the scenes working all the editing magic and filming, but we felt like it was important to share our daughter Harper's story. A lot of you are familiar with it, and it was something that we thought through, and I think I was more on board with sharing, and then Jon was hesitant because it's a hard place to go to. It's a hard thing to talk about, but we recognize that the Lord has given us Harper and her testimony for a reason, and so we think that, it is important to share for those parents who are going through something similar to be able to relate, but then also to just show how God works in every situation, in every season, in every scenario. And we want to share that. We want to point you to see God's hand in everything that happens in your life, good and bad circumstances. So we were married in 2012. And we decided, that we wanted to wait a little bit before having kids. So after being married for about 4 years, we decided to have a child. And we had Harper on May 5th, 2016. And it's been a journey ever since. The first year of her life was great. We really just did a normal situation. I mean, she was sick a lot, but that was daycare. And then her first year, she turned 1 May 5th. Our anniversary is May 19th. So why don't you tell us kind of what happened that day?
Yeah, so May 5th, 2017 was her first year birthday, and we had never left her at that point. We were, kind of those overprotective parents of just not wanting to leave your child. But we're coming up on our 5-year anniversary, and so we're like, let's try to do something special. Let this be kind of the first time that we leave. And so my mom and my parents, they lived here in town, and so we decided we were going to go to Hilton Head for just really a night away, and just to be able to celebrate that. And so she was going to come over and spend the night with Harper, and my grandma was 94 at the time. She kind of came along too. And so I remember we got in the car in the garage, and I remember you looked at me and you said, "Everything's going to be okay, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course, everything. Yeah, like don't worry, everything's fine." And like I wanted to assure her, and she's always kind of been the worrier, and so. I didn't have any, reason to think otherwise. And so we get to Hilton Head, open up the door, we walk out into the balcony, it kind of just, ready to have a good weekend. And it was literally after we opened up the door of the balcony, get a call from my mom, and she says, "You need to come home. She's having a seizure." And I remember when she said that, my first thought was my grandma. I mean, she's 94 years old, and I just went there and I said, you mean Grandma or Jem? That's what we called her. And she said, "No, Harper." And I remember in that moment, like the first thing that came to my mind was, I'm going to have to tell you this. And I'm going, everything just changed. And we get off the phone, and I just remember telling you, and we couldn't in our minds even put the pieces together. We couldn't even understand or wrap our minds around what was happening. And so we just grabbed our stuff and we loaded up the car and we just left. And we didn't say a lot on the drive back. And, I just remember thinking, like, I just want to get to her. I just want to hold her, because I felt like I wanted to know, like, Daddy's there. And I just couldn't, because we were away, like I couldn't get to her fast enough. And I wanted to be this strong leader of our family and just grab your hand or come in and give my mom a hug or do all these things. And I couldn't do that in that moment. And I regret that a lot. But it was just where we were at. And
well, I think we were in shock. And also, we had called our neighbor to go help, and she was great because she really assured us, like, okay, she's breathing, she's alive, she's come out of it. It was a very long seizure, longer than typical, about 10 minutes or so. We never really were clear on that. It was just a crazy moment. And of course, EMS was there. And one not funny, but funny after the fact situation was they were asking us all these questions, and we were trying to give the best information we could, but we were so scattered. And they asked for our pediatrician's name, and Jon said Olivia Benson, which is an actress on the show
Law and Order. Yeah.
Law and Order. No, our pediatrician was not Olivia Benson. Her last name is Benson, and she's incredible. But everything was just happening, and it just felt like such a blur. And then, so they went to the hospital, and I called my best friend, Mandy, to go and help because obviously his mom was distraught. It was just, it's a terrifying thing to watch. It's something you never, ever want to see your child go through. And of course, we didn't know at the time, like, what was the cause, what was happening. And when they got to the hospital, they were talking about how she had a fever. And so it was probably a febrile seizure, which I was familiar with, and honestly gave me a little bit of comfort because I'm like, okay, I know what that is. I know it happens when kids get fevers, but, a lot of times it'll only happen once. And we were kind of reassured by the doctors, like, yeah, most of the time, febrile seizures are something that will go away by the time the kid is, 4. I think they gave us an age, and, I wouldn't worry about it. It's probably okay. And sometimes it just never even happens again. So obviously, it took us some time to process what had happened. And I remember calling a good friend of mine, Sam, whose son had also had febrile seizures. And I'm like, how am I supposed to sleep ever again? Because I think I felt at that moment like I can never relax again because this, what if this happens while she's sleeping?
Right.
And we don't know.
Yeah, and it just created this, and that feeling progressed and progressed and progressed because unfortunately it wasn't just the one. And that was what was really hard, is every time you would go to a doctor and they would say, well, it's probably just this, it would give you an element of hope. And then she would have another. And you're like, well, maybe it's something else. And so we would find a little bit more information out, and well, maybe it's this, but hey, the good news is this. And then she'd have another one, and it would be a different one. And it's every time we thought we had some hope, it would just be like a Band-Aid getting ripped off. And we realized that more and more we weren't getting the answers that we wanted. It seemed like every diagnosis was wrong. Like it just wasn't what we just weren't getting the answers. And I think it just got we got very angry, very frustrated, because it just seemed like we couldn't find any relief, and no answer was right. And we're just going, what's wrong with our child? What's going on? And how do we ever live again? How do we ever sleep again? How do we ever breathe again? And I think it was during that time too that so much of it seemed almost intentional when they would happen. And what I mean by that is, like, I'm not one of those people. I mean, I'm a pastor, so like obviously like my life is, I think about the Lord a lot and think about how he interacts in my life. But I think sometimes when bad things can happen, a lot of times people will say, well, that was the devil did that, or the enemy did that. And I think, the enemy's at work, but I also think sometimes just bad things happen. Sometimes you stub your toe, and that's just because you stub your toe. But I think that so much of it, I do feel like, were attacks from the enemy. Like scripture says that the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Like it says that the enemy roars around like a lion looking to devour us. And those are the best descriptive verbs that I feel like was what was taking place then, is we were our lives were being stolen from us. We were being destroyed. We were being devoured because it seemed like it would happen. Like, I mean, again, how could it happen on our anniversary? So now every anniversary we can't enjoy because there's something in our memory that goes back to that. There were family events that over and over again we would spend time with family, and she would have a seizure during that event, or it would be during a celebration that it would happen. And so all these things that we looked forward to, then we would associate with a seizure. We would associate with something bad. I think about several years ago, she actually made it to being a year free. And it was, I mean, to think that that was even possible blew our minds. And so it was such a victory. We celebrated it. Our family celebrated, our friends celebrated it. We post on social media. We're so cautious of that because we didn't want to jinx it. Not that that's a thing, but
it felt like a thing.
It felt like a thing. Yeah. And so we decided to actually go on a vacation, and that was something we hadn't really done because we were so fearful, but we're like, we're going to do it. And I think it was day 2 of the vacation, she has a seizure. And I just was like, you've got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
And we had to fight so hard not to just immediately spiral again. But I just remember we were sitting at a restaurant. I'm like, we are being attacked. This is an attack of the enemy, and he is wanting to rob this past year from us. And through that, it hit us that this what just happened does not take away from what God did this past year. And I think pretty quickly came to that. We had to see that, like, this doesn't change this. Like, God has been faithful to us in an incredible way that we didn't even think was possible. Right. And the enemy thought he could do this to try to take this away from us. And we said, no, like, that's not going to be the case. Like, you have no place in here. Flee from us in this. And we had to make that choice to be able to do that. But again, so much of this has felt like an attack. It has felt like he wants to destroy us. But I think the longer we think about it from that perspective, the more we miss what God has done through all of this.
Yeah. And I think backing up, just talking about being destroyed, I mean, literally, she had a condition that we didn't know at the time, but she was having prolonged seizures. So it wasn't just like we were dealing with, a 30-second seizure, which is still terrible. You never want your child to have a seizure, but we were dealing with 10 minutes, 15-minute seizures. We were constantly calling 911. We had ambulances come. We were going to the hospital and not knowing, like, what is going to happen? Like, what is the end game here? Like, we had so many people that rallied around us and prayed for us, but it was like, God, answer. Yeah. Like, I feel like at one point she was having seizures bi-weekly. Yeah. And it was happening so much. And I think that's where that like, we literally had no joy. We were felt isolated from everything because we were just desperate to try to protect her. Yeah. And so I think, we a lot of times had to not go to events or, not allow her to do things that normal kids would do because we were so terrified. And I think no one understands that feeling unless they've been there. No one truly can understand. They can think about what it might be like. They can feel sorry for us. They can help support us. But ultimately, a lot of the things they just didn't understand. And I think it felt very isolating in that moment because you're always trying to explain why. And
during that time, we were trying to figure out, what can she do?
Yeah, what are the triggers?
Yeah, and so it's what's actually going to cause it. So is it the food she's eating? Is it, how is she getting too worked up? Is it exerted too much? Is it heat? What is all these different factors? And when you're trying to figure out those triggers, the only way for you to do that is for her to have a seizure because you realize, that caused that trigger. So it's like you are constantly in this line of wanting to find that balance of, I want her to be able to enjoy as much as she can. It's almost like you got to go up to that limit without going over that limit, but we don't know what that limit is.
Yeah, and it's very confusing.
Very confusing, very frustrating. And again, those are the things that we feel like we know that's not always going to make sense to other people because we're having to make decisions and we know things that other people aren't seeing and they're not recognizing, and no fault to them because again, there's times that she can do something and be fine and no issue. And there can be times that she can do that same thing and it seems like there is an issue. And I think we've gotten much better at understanding it now, but I think, that was something that I know it wouldn't make sense if like, well, why can't she do this? What's the big deal with this? And again, as her parents, like we knew the result of this, but it felt like we were having to prevent her from enjoying something or having fun with something. We were having to say no to a good thing. And that's a very hard thing, one, for a child to understand, for us to understand, for others to understand. But I do think like it gave me a picture of probably the relationship that we have with God oftentimes, is that there's things that we look at and then we go, what's wrong with this? This seems like a good thing. This seems like a positive thing. But either God's wanting something better for us, or he sees that there's a danger there that we don't see. And I think that is something that I've been able to see, that correlation that's helped me understand that, oh, God sometimes sees things that I don't see. Sometimes as Harper's dad, I'm going to see things she doesn't see, or others people aren't going to be able to see because I understand something that they don't. And so, I mean, again, throughout all of this, it's just, there's constant things we've been learning that we wouldn't have learned had this not been something that we've been walking through.
Well, and I think it's taught us a lot about control. I like to be in control. I have anxiety, OCD. And so being out of control is legitimately my worst fear. And my worst fears were realized when I had a child who I literally did not know and could not control when a seizure was coming. And that was debilitating. I'm talking like that's all I could think about. I couldn't do my job. I felt like I just could not do anything else other than be consumed by her, whatever was happening. And again, at one point, we still didn't know. And so we ended up going to Augusta, and for a while, she was being treated by a neurologist who had given some medicine, but it wasn't effective. So we went in, had the EEG done. I think she was 2. And she was diagnosed with epilepsy at that time.
It's like whenever she had the first one, I knew some people growing up that had epilepsy, and it was pretty severe. And I think that was the word I didn't want to hear. And so up to this point, it was like that word hadn't really been entertained yet. And so I felt protected.
Yeah.
And the moment I heard that, it almost crushed me more than even hearing that first phone call, because it was like I knew what that could mean.
Yeah.
And I again felt like it's over. We're done.
Yeah. And yes, I mean, I agree, but I think that there was some type of freedom in like, now we know.
Yeah.
Okay, so at least now we know. Now we have to process what's next. And what was difficult, and I think parents with any child who has a disability, whether it be a learning disability or physical disability, there's no handbook. There is no training for parents. You literally have to figure it out as you go, and you have to learn how to advocate for your child when you don't even know the ins and outs of everything. And it is so confusing and so difficult. And so at the time, we were seeing a doctor in Augusta, and it seemed as though, he kind of had a plan for us. And I think that gave us some comfort. But then she started having just like breakthrough seizures, and they were the worst seizures that we had ever seen. I mean, they were horrible. And I remember one specific seizure that will always be ingrained in my mind, March 4th, because I was wearing a shirt that said lucky, feeling lucky. And I've never worn the shirt again because it's very triggering to me. Basically, I got a call from Jon saying that she was having a seizure. We went to the hospital. She was still seizing up until we were brought back to the hospital room. And I just remember being like, what is happening right now? And you feel so helpless because you can't do anything. There's literally nothing you can do except watch and pray. And we just prayed and prayed and prayed. And Brandon came and prayed with us, and he just sat with us, our pastor.
And I think one of the most significant things that he did was as a pastor, a lot of times you want to have the words, you want to give answers, and the best thing he did is he just sat with us. He didn't say, he prayed and then he just sat. And we knew there wasn't anything that could be said in that moment, but like, he's like, I'm not going anywhere. This is where I'm going to be. And there's been multiple times that people have done that for us at the hospital. I remember one of them when Mike came, your principal.
My principals came. That was the same
one,
time.
yeah. And he just sat, and again, there wasn't anything other than just, we're here. We're just gonna be with you, and we can't fix it other than the community. But again, going back to like, things kept on happening that we felt like something is still not adding up. Like all of this is not making sense in it, and you question the doctors, but it's like, we're not doctors. We don't know what we're saying either, but we feel like, but we know our child, and you're just trying to navigate what they know versus what you know and what you're seeing, but we just still felt like we haven't found it yet. We're not solving this. There's more that needs to be done, which ultimately, I guess, led us to begin to want to seek out
a second opinion. Yeah, and I think that's so important, for parents, is that I always encourage parents that I've come in contact with, if their child has epilepsy or another illness, that you don't have to stay with the doctor you're with. You don't have to just blindly trust. And it's not that the doctor we were seeing was phenomenal. And for most kids, he was able to get the seizures under control. I mean, he was well known in the Augusta area. But for some reason, something bigger was going on. And I just remember when we were transferred to Augusta by ambulance, that after that seizure, I remember just like not even knowing what to say. So all I could do was just sing that song, Tremble, which is, just saying the name of Jesus, because you're just like, that's all I can say right now. And I just need you to intervene and like make this darkness go away. And so during COVID, I remember our friends telling us about a doctor in Atlanta who was their neurologist or their niece's neurologist or something like that. So anyway, we were like, well, it won't hurt. So we got in contact with him, and at the time we had to do a telemed. And he received all the information. I mean, we literally had an hour conversation with him because there was so much history.
We had a Google sheet of just documentation.
Seizure after seizure. And I think at the time it was like over 20 seizures, which is incredible to think about at this time. But we really liked him, and he was very attentive, very,
he was the first one that didn't look at each individual one. He pulled back from it.
Yeah, and he was able to see the bigger picture.
Let me look at from day one to now, and what all, looking at all the pieces and all the medicines and all the things that have happened, and really began to ask those questions. So let me look at the whole picture, and I think ultimately that was the game changer.
Yes, absolutely.
But I still remember when he said, I'm going to tell you where I'm leaning in terms of what this diagnosis is. He said, but we need to do some testing on it. And he said, so here's what I'm going to tell you to do. Don't Google it. Don't look it up. And that, I'm glad he said that, but at the same time, it's like, well, what are we going to do? And
I didn't Google it.
You didn't. And I did. But not immediately. I withheld for a while, and we were waiting on the test results. And finally I just was like, I need to know what the potential is. And like
that was
said,
a mistake.
Yeah, it was. It wasn't good because, we did find out while she doesn't have the genetic marker, he feels like it was a clinical diagnosis that's what it was. And it's something called Dravet, and it's a very severe form of epilepsy. And most kids that have it, it affects them significantly, and mentally, physically, and there's a high mortality rate with it as well. And I think knowing that, of going, death is an option in this. And I know there's other parents that's their story too, and there's close friends of ours that it's knowing their child might not live the same length that other kids will, and just going, while it's like we finally had the pieces that
Yeah.
brought hope, that brought peace, but at the same time it was, but this isn't what this is horrible. And what's it now? What's gonna come? What's next year gonna look like? And the year after that, and the year after that, and he can't really give us those answers.
Right.
But here's where I feel like we began seeing God's faithfulness is even him, and I don't know if he's a believer or not, but even he has pointed out to us, like, y'all need to understand how blessed y'all are, because like she's not normal in this scenario. Like typically what you see in kids that have this, it is very extreme. The fact that y'all are seeing, because he got us on the right medicine.
Yeah.
We had to wean her off of some medicine, and that was a process. But we found that right combination to where, again, as we said earlier, we began seeing seasons of where she would be seizure free for extended periods of time. And luckily now is also in one of those seasons that we were just so thankful for. And it was just something that it's been such a blessing to see that, like, wow, even in the midst of what could be so terrible, God's been like doing things in that just seem like this shouldn't even be possible.
Right.
Given the diagnosis.
Not medically explained. It's more than that. And he always says that every visit that we go to, just how excited it makes him to see her thriving in the way that she is. And so I just started calling her a unicorn, because I feel like she's just rare in so many ways, and we'll get to some of that. But man, we're so thankful that we made that transition, that we got the second opinion, and that we didn't just blindly follow what was happening, because there was so much more that was happening. Right. And Dravet does affect her. We do therapies for muscle weakness, and she has a learning disability. And, we've had to navigate that and learn a lot along the way of how we can support her best. But there's so much more to Harper that is just so incredible that the Lord has given us.
And I think it's sometimes it's easy to just look at the limitations that she has, and because there are there, but then there's also areas that we begin to see her thrive in, and especially when we have those appointments with the doctor, and he's just going, guys, like, don't miss what's happening here, and to see those things as well, like it helps us pull back from the perspective of just the limitation or just the issue, and not to see that, like, okay, there's other things that are coming from this. And I think that that's something that really that helped us get to a point where we ended up finding even a scripture that we felt like spoke into this and really gave us some clarity of, like, how is God going to use this? How is he going to take what seems like the worst thing that could happen and make it into something that's really incredible? And there's a passage, and I think it's really you were the one that kind of pointed it out, but it's John 9:3, and it's this section of scripture where you see Jesus is interacting with this man that was born blind, and the people around, they're saying, why was this man born blind? During that time, they kind of attributed that to, it must have been his own sin or his parents' sin that caused this to happen. And Jesus looks at him and looks at them, and he just answers this question, and he says, this happened so that the works of God might be displayed. And it just hit us that, like, this man was literally blind his whole life. That affected, and especially during that time, that he probably wouldn't have been on to work. He probably would have been homeless. He probably would have been just without, because he wasn't capable of doing anything. And this happened so that this moment in time, when Jesus interacted with him, Jesus was going to perform a miracle and ultimately heal this man. But it's like, you're telling me that, like, this man had to live his whole life just for this moment in time. But it's like, once I recognize that, and I'm like, well, that's what God does all the time. I think it just reminded me that you look at the cross, like, Jesus, the Son of God, being murdered, is a pretty awful thing. Like, there's nothing that I can think of in this world that could sum up God sending his son to this earth and us as humans murdering him. Like, that's a pretty awful thing. And God said, okay, I'm going to take this thing that caused pain, that caused hurt, that caused sadness, that caused fear, that caused all of those real feelings, especially for those disciples during that time. And he says, okay, I'm going to use that. I'm going to take that moment in time that seemed like an attack from the enemy, and I'm going to say, this is going to be the thing that redeems all of mankind. This is going to be the thing that I'm going to use for my glory, for my purpose. And I think the more I think about that, the more I begin to now look at Harper's life and look at every interaction, every scenario that's happened, and go, look at what you were able to do through sadness, through brokenness, through sickness, through hurt, through fear, through pain, through worry, through all of those emotions that we've had. That, and I'm not discounting those things. Those things sucked, you know, but like, I mean, I know one in particular for me is the week after that first seizure, I had to preach that Sunday, and Brandon, he gave me the opportunity to not do it, but I was like, I think I need to. And I remember specifically telling them, this message is not for you today. This message, I'm going to be preaching to myself today, and you all just get to hear it. And it was, something that I felt like I needed to preach God's word. I needed to preach that over myself and say, what does God's word say about this? And I don't remember the entire message, but I do remember that when I got to the end, there was an opportunity for people to respond to the gospel. And my dad was there that day. And I just remember seeing him raise his hand. And in that moment, I'm going, like, God didn't need Harper to have a seizure for my dad to come to faith. But like, God was like, Jon, I want you to understand something. Like, this isn't for nothing, and I'm going to use this. And this was something that I had been praying for my dad for years and years and years. And now here it is, this thing that caused so much pain for me in my life. And yet God's saying, it's not for nothing. I'm going to use this so that the works of God might be displayed. And that has happened time and time and time again in Harper's life, whether it's things that she said or things that have happened. I mean, there's countless stories that, you know, we could share about that.
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, we ended up moving to a new neighborhood.
In the midst of this really
in the midst
season.
of a really bad season and COVID. So killing it. But we, you know, looking back, so I didn't really think about it in the moment, I don't think. Like, I just thought, you know, we're moving into this neighborhood we've always wanted to live in, and it'll give our kids an opportunity to have friends in their neighborhood, and it has. But looking now, you know, just at the works of God, we've just seen his provision in every single step in a way that it's hard to describe. It's hard to verbalize. One of those being that he placed us between two nurses who ended up just, you know, rallying around us and loving us and supporting us and being a sounding board for us and being literally coming in and saving Harper in the midst of his seizure, both of them. And we live across from our pharmacist, and there's a doctor next door to her, and it's just like, you know, wow, God, like, how could you have I mean, we couldn't have asked for a better scenario. Jon's parents live right down the street. You know, there's just people that are literally surrounding us who can support us and can support Harper and can make us feel safe and secure. And they did that. And I remember during COVID, honestly, even though we were still going through all of this, it was like the sweetest time because our neighbors would come over and just sit with us. And to me, that was like what I needed. I needed to not feel isolated. And they came to us. And so we didn't have to go anywhere. We could put the kids to bed. And then we had this time with them that wasn't anything special. I mean, it wasn't like, you know, we were just talking about random stuff. But just that friendship and that feeling of you're not alone. We're here with you. We're walking with you. We're providing this sense of companionship for you in a moment where you really, really need it.
Well, and when I think about that and I think about, what we're talking about is community. We're talking about how, we know that like we're not meant to do life alone. And we say that a lot at church. And I was thinking about a message that our pastor preached a couple even weeks ago where he talked about this idea, and he talked about how, so often there's that passage of scripture that we hear that says that God won't give you more than you can handle. But the only issue is that he doesn't say that.
Right.
Is that that's not in the Bible, is that in fact, what we see in scripture is that God often gives us more than we can handle. But one of the things that Brandon said is he said that the way that he's able to handle it, the way that he's able to step in and do that for you is through the context of community. He provides other people around you that help bear your burdens with you, and they can't necessarily carry all of those burdens. There's certain things that, we just, as the parents, like we just have to go through and we just have to deal with. But there are other things that people walking alongside of us can help us through just by the context of them being in our lives and again, like you said, being present is that was the most meaningful thing for us with our neighbors, is just their presence, and we don't see them near as much now. And I think that not because we don't want to, like we love them and we love any time we have with them. And I think, I would hope they would say the same thing, but like, I think it's like, God was using them intentionally in that moment. And I don't know whether that was a conscious decision on their part or not, but it was like, in those evenings, it was like they were going to come over and they were just going to sit. And I think it helped us feel, again, not alone, and it wasn't like they were, again, shifting or changing or fixing anything. I mean, other than, when she would come over to care for Harper, but like, it was just the presence. And it goes back to, again, when Brandon was in that hospital, we're with you in this thing. And sometimes we process things with them and unpack feelings and emotions, and they helped us sort through those through their own experiences at times. But I think what I hate is that I see so many people that go through difficult things either with their kids or with themselves or just things in their lives, and they isolate themselves. They don't talk about it. And I think that's one of the things that I feel like we've tried to be pretty transparent about our life, what's going on in our life, and when things are great and celebrating that with people. And there's other times where we're like, you know what, things aren't great right now and things are really difficult, and we're not going to hide that. We're not going to shy away from that. And I think that it's opened so many doors for us to have conversations with other people that are walking and navigating their own situations. And because we've been open with ours, not that it's the exact same thing. And I think I'm really cautious of that. At any time I share, I don't want somebody to think that I'm trying to get them to understand what I'm going through, or that now because of that, I understand what they're going through, because we don't. Like, everything's different, but there's similar emotions and feelings, grief that come with that we can find common ground in those things. And it's really allowed us to have those opportunities to either to speak into somebody's life or just to say, hey, we get it. We're here. We understand. And you're not alone in that. But I know there's so many people that we know they just continue to hold on to that. And I think that's something that it pains me to know they're alone in that. And I just think that that's one of the things that I don't want to stop being vocal about her story, even though it is tough sometimes.
Yeah, it's hard to talk about. And so we don't, I think we did isolate for a while because it was too painful to talk about. It was I didn't want to break down crying. I didn't want to, because I felt like if I started crying, then I just wouldn't stop. And now people joke about how I'm not emotional, and it's because I've cried all my tears, but obviously not. But I think that it's hard for people to talk about, but it's worth it. Even in the sense of getting professional therapy, like going to therapy and talking through these real things that happen and, trying to process them with someone who can really help you process, because it's very, very scary to witness your child having a seizure or to deal with your child even being sick for a season. I mean, it's not easy even when our younger daughter gets sick. We worry about her, and it's painful to watch, and it's hard to see, them struggle in any way, but we do know that surrounding ourselves with the right people and talking about it is important, and not just masking.
Right. And I think even with that, it's, I also want to find the balance of like, I want to look for those opportunities to talk about it and be transparent with it. But I also want to look at those things as that this diagnosis for Harper isn't who she is.
No.
And she is so much more than that. Our family is so much more than her story, and I think that that's where, like, we were even talking before we did today, is like, I don't want every story about us to be Harper. And because there's more to our story, there's more that God's doing than just that. That's a big aspect of it. But I think sometimes we can get defined by those big things in our lives and not see that there's still so much more that God is doing in us. And that's a part of us, it's an element of us, but it's not everything. And I think that's what we've seen now also, is that because we are in a good season right now, is we're getting to begin to experience some of those other things, some of those other elements that God's writing in our story. I think this podcast, is one of those examples that I just have been so proud of Natalie for doing this, because it's something that it's another aspect of our lives that brings us joy and brings us and I think that's been the most incredible thing, is hearing all of these other people's stories, and you can identify with so much of them. Is every single person you've had on, like, has completely different stories than us, and yet there are things that I look at that I go, that makes sense, and I can take that and I can apply that here and I can apply that there, and so it's just begin to show us so many new things. And
I mean, and I think that you see people differently when you go through difficult experiences. And I think even in my own career, I know that as a mom of a child who has special needs, then talking to parents and sitting in IEP meetings with parents who are just distraught because they don't know how to help their child, I'm so much more, it's not that I didn't care before, because of course I cared, but I'm so much more empathetic, and I'm so much more willing to leave no stone unturned to try to help that family. But also I can relate, and so I can share that this is a season, and in every season we have to navigate different things. But, one of the things my mom told me one day when I was breaking down, she said, "Natalie, I know it's hard, but God's going to give you the grace that you need for each day. So you just have to keep taking one step forward." And I think with any parent or any person who is going through any difficult circumstance, I think it covers everything. Is that, like, a relationship with the Lord is so important, because you have to have it. It's vital to you continuing to move forward and not quitting, because life is hard and things are hard and they're not going to go away. Our world is broken. So we need the Lord. We need His grace every single day. And I think that our experience with Harper has shown us how much we need the Lord and how much we have to trust Him, because we can't do it on our own.
Yeah, and I think, on top of Him giving us the grace that we need each day, like, He gives us the knowledge and the tools that we need to try to make the best decisions that we can each day. And I think that was something we had to learn as well, is that what we would end up doing is, as we got new information, we would begin to assess the decisions that we made in the past off of the information that we have today. And so we would look at when we made a decision in the past and we would say, "Oh, we got that wrong," or "I can't believe we did that." But we didn't have that information, and we didn't have what we know today. And I think we can't do that to ourselves. We can't try to think that what we know today, or our experience or our knowledge or our perspective today, that we should have known that back then. And I think when I look over the course of our lives, every single time we try to make the best decision that we can in those moments. And that's something I've realized, whether it's with Harper or just our own personal lives, or whether that's in my professional life of leading other people. Oftentimes I look back and I go, "Man, I got that wrong. I got this wrong. I should have done this differently." But I remember in the moment, I wasn't going into that thinking, "Let me make a bad decision here. Let me do the wrong thing here." I was going with the information I had, with the experience I had, with my knowledge base, with all those things, I made the best decision that I could in that moment. I didn't intentionally try to do harm to someone or to something
Right.
or get something wrong, but I learn and I grow. But I've got to take those things and look forward and not examine my past self for information that I have today. And so again, there's just so many things that I think like we've grown in, and it's given us perspective that we wouldn't have had. And again, I can look at the limitations, and I can look at the things that she deals with. She was selectively mute for a while, and that was
Yes.
difficult. And it was, I just was worried about how she's going to interact with friends. And then we got over that hump, and then she started stuttering. And then I'm going, how, friends can be awful and they can be mean. And how's that going to affect her then? But again, like, she's had friends that are around here, especially people that have been a couple of years older than her, that just love her and love her, the fact that she is unique and that she is different. And like, I remember she got invited to a birthday party one time from somebody that they aren't really like close friends. They know each other, but this girl was just like, I want Harper to come. Like, and it just made me so happy because she didn't look at Harper through her nuance or her limitations or the fact that she's a little immature at times, or that she stutters and can't always communicate. She was just like, she seems cool. I want to spend some time with her. And so it's like, again, that community contest we were talking about earlier. It's just, there's been so many things, and that again, we've seen.
And people that have been so significant along the way with Harper's growth. And, thinking about her teachers at school, just every single year have just poured so much love into her. And, I care about the learning side. I want her to learn. I want her to learn how to read. I want her to be able to do things that other kids can do. But mostly, I just want them to love her because she may be behind in academics for the rest of her life. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But as long as she feels loved, that's literally all I care about. And that happens time and time and time again. And so I think that what we wanted you to see from this podcast, from us doing this, is not for pity, not for anything, any other motive than to show you that God is so big and God is so mighty, and He provides. He can be your provision, and He gives us the grace we need to continue to take steps forward. And in any case, in anybody's, whether you have kids or not, it doesn't matter that, things are still hard. So trusting, having that relationship with the Lord is everything, because you can't live out God's design for your life without a relationship with Jesus. And I think what we've learned through our experiences, we've grown that we have to lean on Jesus, because if we don't, we won't make it.
Right.
And I think that we just want people to know that. We want people to know how important our relationship with the Lord is, which is why in this podcast, I always try to point people back to the gospel intentionally.
I remember something that Harper said several years ago and I don't remember the context of it. We were talking about something, and maybe I think you were talking to her about something that she was going through, and she just said this. She said, Jesus is a good Jesus.
He can do anything He wants.
He can do anything He wants. And maybe we were talking about healing, or somebody was sick.
It was a friend of ours who was very ill from COVID, who we did not think would survive at the time.
Right.
We were praying for him, and that's the comment that she made.
Yeah, it is. And so I think about that, and I think about how here's this child who much of her life has been difficult circumstances, has been hospital visits, has been, emotional, traumatic experiences. And from her vantage point, what she sees is that Jesus is a good Jesus. He can do anything that He wants. And I just think that, like, we have to be able to see beyond these specific circumstances that happen in this broken world and see that God is moving through that. And He can do that even through a child who's experienced horrible things, and it's, again, there's so many things that, it's stretched and grown our faith in ways that we never, would have imagined. And I don't love it, all the
Yeah.
time, but like you said, like without our faith, I don't know how we would have navigated it or gotten through it. And, and our hope and our prayer is that my dad wouldn't be the only person that ends up coming to know the Lord through her story. Is I believe that God's going to do more through that, and he's going to use that as just the open door for somebody to see maybe God loves me in that same way, and he does, and that would continue to happen, and we would just continue to have more and more opportunities to use this scenario as an open door conversation for somebody about the Lord.
Yeah.
So
thanks for being willing to go there. It's hard to go to places that we don't want to, but I think it's important to share with people. And obviously we just want everyone to know how good God is and how he's transformed our lives and our family's life. And luckily, Harper is doing great. She's thriving and making progress, and she keeps us on our toes, and she makes us laugh and has a very special relationship with the Lord already as a young child. So thank you for listening.
Well, Natalie, there is something we have to do at the end of every podcast.
Oh, yeah.
You always ask people how they felt seen, and so I think we both need to share. So, Natalie, I want to ask you first.
No.
How have you feel seen?
Okay,
recently?
now I know what it feels like when I put them on the spot.
Exactly.
That's really hard, actually.
It is a tough question.
Well, I think, through our kids, they see the worst side of us and the best side of us. But what I've noticed through Adeline specifically, she is a mini version of myself, which is very hard sometimes. But what I see is that she sees everything that I do, and good or bad, and that she emulates it.
Yeah.
And that she's our parrot. But one of the things like I've been trying to do is on the way to school, I pray with them every morning. And Friday when we went to school, Adeline said she wanted to pray. And the words that she spoke were so beyond what I felt like a child her age should know. And that doesn't pat me on the back. That is the Lord. She was asking for peace, for God to give us peace. And I probably prayed for that going into school, but she asked for healing for my mom who just had surgery, and, that we would be an encouragement to her. And those words, like there's meaning to that, and she sees what we're doing. And so it reminded me how important that is, to be intentional, that sometimes we feel like we're not making a difference. Sometimes we feel like we're screwing this whole thing up parenting wise, but then when you listen to your child pray and recognize how powerful that is, then you see how much they see in you,
right, and
how much they copy that.
Yeah, definitely.
Good and bad.
Right.
What about you?
I think, again, I agree with that. I think there's so many things that I think we see from our kids, good and bad. But I think something I was thinking about even as we were talking was actually a conversation I had with somebody this past week, actually over Facebook. It was a friend of mine from college that she has suffered, I think, about 6 miscarriages in her life, has really struggled with infertility. And we randomly messaged one another about something, and I was just, she had just recently posted that she had lost one, but also by God's grace, they have a healthy child as well, and that was an incredible thing to watch. But I was just encouraging her and said, I noticed that, and I'm just praying that God moves through his life, even the small life that he had. And I just said, I appreciate how transparent you have been through this journey, because she's been very vocal about, again, the ups and the downs. And I just appreciated that so much. And she said, here's what's crazy, Jon. She said, 20 years ago, when we were in college, I shared my testimony at this ministry we were both involved in. And she said, to this day, I remember you coming up to me and saying, thank you for being transparent. She said, I think about that, and it's one of the reasons I'm able to be transparent today, because I recognized how my story can be used. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting here going like, I kind of remember saying that. I kind of don't remember saying that, but it was just kind of a moment where I really felt like God was like, you don't ever know the impact you're going to have on people.
Yep.
And it was just like God used some random conversation, random thing that I said to encourage somebody. And it was just a small aspect of what has played into her entire journey. And it has now encouraged other people because of that. And mm-hmm. so I just think and I think it gives more confidence of why we can continue to share and want to continue to talk and want to continue to do these things, because we just never know the impact that that's going to have. And I think often about what are those stories God's going to tell us when we get to heaven of the role that we played in somebody's life or their story, or even how they came to faith, that we had no idea that we even played a part in that. Yeah. And so how much God can use us despite us. And that was something that really, it was such an encouraging thing to see that it happened. Not to pat myself on the back, but it was just like, wow, like God used something that I didn't even realize He used. So
yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Thank you for being willing at the last minute. So that is another episode of the ICU podcast, and another will be released next Friday. So thank you for listening, and I hope that you guys were encouraged and are able to take something away from this to apply to your own life, and we'll see you next week.